Reviewing what we talked. Yeah, reviewing what we talked about yesterday. Sort of, those of you here yesterday remember this started with Sebastian giving a sort of nice overview presentation about some scenarios where comparisons using real-world treatment assignment or naturalistic treatment assignment appeared to deliver the right answer. Some of the points, starting with some of the points he made, well, actually this first one he made near the end, but I put it at the beginning because I think it's important. The distinction between what are the best methods for doing observational comparisons, we can say some things about that. When should we do observational comparisons? When would we say this one isn't going to work? That's a bit harder one. We can say what are the best practices, but that's a different question from are those best practices good enough in this situation? The other point about differences between issues dealt with in the design phase and the analysis phase. I think Sebastian pointed out that some of the sort of eternal time bias and some of these other issues, you say, that's a design question. You don't handle that later by propensity scores or some adjustment or matching method. You handle that up front. So we need to, when we think about the credibility of an observational comparison, we need to look both at those upfront design decisions and then at the analytic method. Discussion about both ideally the importance of using standard methods for data transformation and data analysis, and if non-standard methods were necessary, you need to justify that and you need to make them completely public. Talked again about superiority, non-inferiority designs. Oh, and the point about retrospective studies, the data are already baked. That is what it is. There was some discussion about there can still be prospective studies that use naturalistic treatment assignment. That's something we didn't talk about as much, but that is an option. And especially if we are interested in the kind of data that may not be collected, if we're interested in understanding patients' preferences and experiences that may not be well represented in the exhaustive healthcare system data, we might still allow naturalistic treatment assignment but do prospective data collection. So you can keep scrolling down. Talked about, trying to move beyond there is unmeasured confounding to how big would the unmeasured confounding have to be in order to significantly influence this result, and talked about some specific methods for that. Looking at, how big would the sort of, differential, the channeling or differential treatment assignment need to be to account for an observed result. One of the challenges we talked about the interpretability of some of these, as I think Sebastian pointed out, one of the beauties of a randomized trial is not only that it usually deals with the unmeasured confounding question, but everybody who's a sports fan like me knows what a coin flip means. There's a reason why they do that at the beginning of the ball game rather than going into the back room and doing a propensity score to decide who gets to kick off first. I would say only the New England Patriots do that. Sorry, had to say that. since all those Boston people went home yesterday, I can say that. But the transparency, that the issue is that sometimes the analytic complexity is a concern when we're communicating the results to some stakeholders, because they'd say, well, I don't understand the math there, so can I trust it? Keep going down. We talked about, what are the, can we lay out some conditions where we'd say comparisons based on naturalistic treatment assignment or real-world treatment assignment would be more credible? The obvious easy one, expectation of large effects. The long-term outcomes, I guess I might edit that one. If I remember the discussion, it wasn't so much to say that observational or naturalistic assignment is more believable, but just it may be more necessary because it's more difficult to randomly assign people to 20-year courses of treatment. It's pretty hard to maintain the original treatment assignment over decades. talked about whether the effect depends on clinical observation. This actually circles back to some of the things we talked about blinding. We talked some about this, and I'm not sure we reached a consensus about this idea about knowledge of causal pathways or outcomes proximal to treatment. Can we have more faith in naturalistic comparisons when we believe that there's a simple causal pathway that we can define? Does that mean we're more likely to be able to name the unmeasured confounders, or are we just fooling ourselves? That would be, a good point. Interesting to have people talk some more about. Talked about that complexity or reciprocal effects. And then finally, the point about the sort of in-observational comparisons, the Mulligan effect. And that, for those of you who were here yesterday, this is this idea that you could theoretically do the analysis over and over and over again and only take the result you like. We talked about various ways of, and this is a big concern, we talked about various ways of guarding against that. Certainly transparency is a really good thing, to say that analyses should be registered in advance in some publicly accessible way. When the final published analysis varies from what was registered and proposed, we need to be very suspicious. But I think everyone said, even then, how could you be sure? Because if the data, ironically, if the data are widely accessible to anyone, for all we know, people have done 20 analyses before they, specified their analysis in advance and published it. The discussion about positive and negative controls that, we would like to say, are there comparison outcomes that we would expect to not be affected by this treatment, or are there comparison treatments that we would expect not to affect this outcome? Those are negative controls. That can be helpful. That is actually a partial step toward this thing that I think I brought up yesterday. Some of the Odyssey people have talked about these all-by-all analyses, which is, to me, an interesting idea. Instead of saying we're only going to allow you to do a few comparisons that you specified in advance, we say instead we'll just do all comparisons. What I said about the sort of Mulligan example, which is a golf term for, I get to take my shot over, is you can take your shot over as many times as you want. We're just going to count every single shot you take. But I think there was some discussion yesterday about this all-by-all thing, maybe sort of a utopian idea that would be really cool if we could do it someday, but we're not there yet.